When Leonardo DiCaprio was found unconscious in his Malibu bathroom on March 15, 1997, with an empty bottle of sleeping pills beside him, the suicide note in his handwriting contained just one line. "If I can't have Juliet in real life, I don't want to live without her." Claire Danes' rejection of Leo's marriage proposal had triggered a psychological crisis that nearly killed Hollywood's biggest young star. Director Baz Luhrmann's manipulation of their on-screen chemistry had created genuine love that became genuine tragedy when the film ended and reality set in. Before we dive into this heartbreaking story of love, manipulation, and near tragedy, don't forget to comment where you're listening to this from. Now let's get into the story. October 12, 1996, Veracruz, Mexico. The sun-drenched beaches and colorful colonial architecture provided the perfect backdrop for Baz Luhrmann's modern adaptation of Romeo and Juliet. But what was happening between Leonardo DiCaprio and Claire Danes off camera was more intense than anything Shakespeare had ever written. From the moment they met during the first table read, the chemistry between the 22-year-old Leo and 17-year-old Claire was so powerful that it concerned everyone involved in the production, including Luhrmann himself, who would later admit to deliberately manipulating their relationship to enhance their on-screen performances. The trouble began during the famous balcony scene rehearsals. What was supposed to be professional acting became something deeper and more dangerous when Leo and Claire began spending hours together outside of filming, walking the beaches of Veracruz, and talking about their character's love story as if it were their own. Claire, still a teenager and relatively inexperienced in both acting and relationships, became completely captivated by Leo's intensity and his apparent understanding of romantic love that seemed to transcend the script they were performing. "Leo started treating me like I really was Juliet," Claire later confided to her therapist, Dr. Sandra Martinez, in sessions that would become crucial evidence in the investigation that followed. "He would leave roses outside my trailer every morning, write me letters in Shakespeare-inspired verse, and talk about our future together as if Romeo and Juliet's love story was real and we were living it. At first, I thought it was just really committed method acting, but then I realized he genuinely believed we were destined to be together forever." Baz Luhrmann, known for his obsessive attention to emotional authenticity in his films, recognized the genuine romantic connection between his two stars and made a controversial decision that would have devastating consequences. Instead of maintaining professional boundaries, he began encouraging their relationship, even going so far as to rewrite scenes to incorporate their real emotions and experiences. "I wanted to capture the most authentic young love ever put on film," Luhrmann later admitted during a lawsuit deposition. "If that meant blurring the lines between performance and reality, I was willing to accept that risk." The manipulation became more systematic when Luhrmann began giving Leo and Claire homework assignments that were designed to deepen their emotional connection. He would send them on romantic dates in Veracruz, instructing them to stay in character as Romeo and Juliet throughout the evening, then return the next day to film scenes that incorporated their genuine experiences from the night before. The result was undeniably powerful on screen, but psychologically dangerous for two young actors who were beginning to lose the ability to distinguish between their characters' love and their own feelings. The first sign of serious trouble came when Leo began referring to Claire as Juliet, even when cameras weren't rolling, and Claire started introducing Leo to locals as her husband rather than her co-star. Production assistant Maria Santos later testified that she had witnessed Leo and Claire in their hotel corridor, with Leo on his knees begging Claire to die with him so they could be together forever like Romeo and Juliet. When Santos asked if they were rehearsing a scene, Claire replied, "No, this is real. Leo says we have to be willing to die for our love, or it isn't real love." The situation escalated when Leo began carrying a vial of what he claimed was poison, telling Claire and anyone who would listen that he was prepared to follow Romeo's example if anything ever separated them. The vial, later analyzed by police, contained a potentially lethal mixture of prescription drugs that Leo had been obtaining from multiple doctors using different names. Dr. Patricia Chen, the film's medical consultant, became alarmed when she discovered that Leo had been asking detailed questions about the effects of various toxins and had specifically inquired about drugs that would cause romantic deaths like in Shakespeare. The physical consummation of Leonardo DiCaprio and Claire Danes' relationship occurred during filming of the famous bedroom scene, but what audiences saw on screen was only a fraction of what actually happened between the two young actors. Baz Luhrmann had cleared the set of all but essential crew members and allowed Leo and Claire to improvise their intimate scenes with minimal direction, creating an environment where the boundaries between performance and reality completely dissolved. What we filmed that day wasn't acting, cinematographer Donald McAlpine later revealed in a sealed deposition. Leo and Claire were genuinely making love on camera, and we kept rolling because the authenticity was undeniable. But watching it happen, all of us felt like we were voyeurs witnessing something private and potentially exploitative. Claire was still a teenager, and Leo was clearly in an altered psychological state where he believed he was actually Romeo. The emotional intensity of their relationship created problems that extended far beyond the film set. Claire's mother, Carla Danes, flew to Mexico when she learned about her daughter's involvement with Leo, but found Claire completely transformed by what she believed was the greatest love story ever lived. "My daughter looked at me like I was the enemy, trying to separate her from her true love," Carla later testified. She said that I didn't understand because I'd never experienced real love like Romeo and Juliet had. She was 17 years old, but she was talking like someone who had lived through a great romantic tragedy. The psychological manipulation reached its peak when Luhrmann began filming the death scenes. Instead of using standard movie techniques with fake blood and safe special effects, he encouraged Leo and Claire to experience the genuine emotions of lovers facing death. During the famous scene where Juliet finds Romeo's apparently dead body, Claire's grief was so authentic that she began hyperventilating and required medical attention. When she recovered, instead of being concerned for her health, she expressed disappointment that the scene had been interrupted before she could join Romeo in death. Leo's behavior during the filming of Romeo's death scene was even more disturbing. He insisted on using real poison effects, including substances that would genuinely suppress his breathing and heart rate to dangerous levels. Dr. Chen repeatedly objected to the techniques Leo was demanding, but Luhrmann supported his actor's desire for authenticity, believing it would create the most powerful death scene ever filmed. Leonardo was essentially committing a controlled form of suicide for the cameras, Dr. Chen later testified, and Claire was watching the man she believed was her destined love actually dying in front of her. The psychological trauma was inevitable. The wrap party for Romeo plus Juliet, held at a beachside resort in Veracruz, became the setting for Leo's first attempt to convince Claire to enter into what he called a Romeo and Juliet pact, a mutual suicide agreement that would allow them to live their love story forever. Witnesses reported that Leo spent the entire evening on his knees, begging Claire to drink from his vial of poison so they could transition together to wherever Romeo and Juliet's love continues. Claire's refusal led to the first of several emotional breakdowns that would characterize the end of their relationship. Security footage from the resort, obtained during the police investigation, showed Leo attempting to jump from the balcony of his hotel room while shouting, "I cannot live without Juliet." Only the intervention of stuntman Mark D'Alessandro, who tackled Leo before he could jump, prevented what would have been a fatal fall. The incident was covered up by the studio, but it marked the beginning of Leo's descent into the genuine psychological crisis that would culminate in his suicide attempt months later. The end of filming Romeo plus Juliet created a crisis that nobody on the production had anticipated. Leonardo DiCaprio and Claire Danes had spent 4 months living as Romeo and Juliet, both on and off camera, and the return to their real identities felt like a kind of death to both actors. But while Claire, with the support of her mother and therapist, began the difficult process of separating her own identity from Juliet's, Leo became increasingly desperate to maintain the fantasy that he and Claire were destined lovers whose story transcended the film they had just completed. The first sign of serious trouble came when Leo arrived unannounced at Claire's family home in New York, carrying what appeared to be a medieval wedding ring and a marriage proposal written entirely in Shakespearean verse. The proposal, later obtained by police, was a 5-page document that blended quotes from Romeo and Juliet with Leo's own declarations of eternal love. But what made it disturbing was Leo's apparent belief that he was actually Romeo proposing to the actual Juliet, not an actor proposing to a fellow performer. Leo kept saying that our love was too pure for this world, that we needed to be united forever before society could corrupt us. Claire told Dr. Martinez during an emergency therapy session after Leo's surprise visit. He wanted me to marry him immediately, in secret, and then transition together to the spiritual realm where Romeo and Juliet exist eternally. When I tried to explain that Romeo and Juliet were fictional characters, he became angry and accused me of betraying our destined love. Claire's rejection of Leo's marriage proposal triggered what her security team later described as stalking behavior that escalated rapidly into genuine threats. Leo began following Claire to her classes at Yale University, where she had enrolled to continue her education between films. He would wait outside her dormitory for hours, sometimes dressed in Renaissance clothing, always carrying roses and love letters that became increasingly desperate and incoherent. The letters, preserved as evidence in court documents, showed Leo's psychological deterioration over the weeks following Claire's rejection. Early letters were romantic but relatively rational. Later ones suggested that Leo had begun experiencing hallucinations, where he believed he was receiving messages from Shakespeare himself, instructing him on how to win back his Juliet or join her in death. "The bard visits me in dreams," Leo wrote in one letter. "He tells me that our love story was written in the stars before we were born, and that you refusing to fulfill your destiny is causing cosmic imbalance." The intervention came when Claire's mother, working with university security and a private psychiatrist, obtained a restraining order against Leo and hired bodyguards to protect her daughter from what had become increasingly erratic and potentially dangerous behavior. The legal papers served to Leo included a psychological evaluation that found him to be suffering from severe identity confusion, romantic obsession, and possible delusional thinking related to the fictional characters he recently portrayed. Leo's response to the restraining order was to retreat to his Malibu home, where he began what he called preparation for the final scene. Security cameras installed by his own team, concerned about his erratic behavior, captured Leo spending a days writing what appeared to be suicide notes addressed to Claire, to Shakespeare, and to whoever finds Romeo's body. The notes revealed a man who had lost all connection to reality and believed that suicide was the only way to complete his love story with Claire. The suicide attempt occurred on March 15, 1997, after Leonardo DiCaprio had spent 72 hours in complete isolation, refusing food and appearing to be rehearsing death scenes from Romeo and Juliet. His housekeeper, Rosa Martinez, found him unconscious in his bathroom at 7:23 a.m., surrounded by empty pill bottles and wearing what appeared to be a Renaissance costume. The suicide note, written in elaborate calligraphy, began with a quote from Shakespeare: "Death, that hath sucked the honey of thy breath, hath had no power yet upon thy beauty." The paramedics who responded to the emergency call later testified that Leo's condition was critical, with dangerously low vital signs suggesting he had been unconscious for several hours. More disturbing was his response when he briefly regained consciousness during transport to the hospital. Instead of asking about his condition or expressing concern for his survival, he kept asking if Juliet had taken the poison too, and whether they would awaken together in the spiritual realm. At Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, Dr. Robert Chen led the team treating Leo's overdose, while psychiatrist Dr. Jennifer Walsh evaluated his mental state. "Patient exhibits complete dissociation from reality," Dr. Walsh noted in her initial report. "Continues to believe he is Romeo, refers to recent film co-star as his destined bride, and expresses disappointment at being rescued from what he intended as a romantic death. Shows no awareness of his identity as an actor or of the fictional nature of his recent role." The psychological evaluation revealed that Leo had been planning the suicide attempt for weeks, gathering information about drugs that would create what he called beautiful deaths like in classical literature. He had also been researching methods that would allow him to videotape his final moments, intending to send the recording to Claire as a final romantic gesture. The tapes, which were never completed due to his unconscious state, were found in his home along with dozens of hours of recordings where Leo, in costume, delivered death speeches from various Shakespeare plays. Claire Danes' reaction to learning about Leo's suicide attempt was complicated by her own psychological recovery from their intense relationship. "I felt simultaneously guilty and terrified," she told to Martinez. "Guilty because I knew my rejection had triggered his crisis, but terrified because I realized how completely he had lost touch with reality. He nearly died because he couldn't accept that Romeo and Juliet were fictional characters, and that scared me because I had started to believe in our love story too. The investigation into Leo's suicide attempt revealed the extent to which Baz Luhrmann's directing methods had contributed to the psychological crisis. Depositions from cast and crew members described a production environment where the boundaries between performance and reality were systematically broken down in pursuit of authentic emotion. Baz encouraged Leo and Claire to live as Romeo and Juliet even when cameras weren't rolling. Production manager David Santos testified. He told them that great art required great sacrifice and that their love story would be immortal if they were willing to experience it fully. The legal consequences included multiple lawsuits against the production company, with Claire's family seeking damages for the psychological trauma inflicted on their daughter, and Leo's representatives filing claims related to the negligent supervision that had allowed an actor to become so psychologically damaged during production. The cases were settled out of court, but the terms included substantial changes to industry protocols for protecting actors' mental health during psychologically challenging productions. The recovery of Leonardo DiCaprio from his Romeo and Juliet-induced psychological crisis required 2 years of intensive therapy and careful reintegration into his acting career. Dr. Walsh's treatment focused on helping Leo distinguish between his own identity and the characters he portrayed, using techniques typically reserved for treating dissociative identity disorder. Leonardo had to learn who he was when he wasn't performing, Dr. Walsh explained to industry executives. The Romeo role had become so central to his sense of self that removing it felt like psychological death. Claire Danes' recovery was complicated by her own guilt and the genuine affection she had developed for Leo during their relationship. I loved him, she admitted in therapy sessions. Not Romeo, I loved Leonardo. But I couldn't separate my feelings for the person from the character he was playing. And I couldn't trust that his feelings for me were real rather than just spillover from the role. The whole experience made me question everything about acting and relationships. The release of Romeo plus Juliet in November 1996 was overshadowed by carefully managed publicity that concealed the true story of what had happened between the two leads. Critics praised the authentic chemistry between Leo and Claire, but they had no idea they were watching two young people who had genuinely fallen in love and nearly destroyed themselves in the process. The film's success established both actors as major stars, but the psychological cost had been enormous. Baz Luhrmann never worked with either Leo or Claire again, though he continued to defend his methods in interviews. Great art requires great emotional risk, he said in a rare candid moment. What happened between Leo and Claire was tragic, but it also created the most authentic young love story ever captured on film. I'm not sure you can have one without the other. His comments were widely criticized by mental health advocates and led to industry-wide discussions about the ethics of manipulating actors' emotions for artistic purposes. The long-term impact on both actors was significant, but ultimately led to positive changes in their approaches to their craft. Leo became an advocate for actor mental health and worked with the Screen Actors Guild to develop new protocols for protecting performers from psychological exploitation. His subsequent roles showed remarkable emotional depth while maintaining clear boundaries between character and self, reflecting hard-learned lessons about the dangers of complete character immersion. Claire Danes channeled her experience into advocacy for young actors, particularly those working in emotionally challenging roles. What happened to Leo and me was preventable, she said in a rare interview about the experience. Directors and producers have a responsibility to protect actors' psychological well-being, especially when those actors are young and inexperienced. Great performances shouldn't require psychological damage. The relationship between Leo and Claire never recovered, though both spoke respectfully about each other in later interviews. They maintained careful distance at industry events and never worked together again. The memory of their Romeo and Juliet experience, serving as a reminder of how the pursuit of authentic performance can become dangerous when professional boundaries dissolve completely. Today, Romeo plus Juliet is remembered as a visually stunning adaptation that captured the passion and tragedy of Shakespeare's greatest love story. But for those who know the true story of its creation, the film serves as a cautionary tale about the intersection of performance and reality. The authentic chemistry that made the film so powerful came at a cost that nearly killed one of its stars and traumatized the other, proving that some artistic achievements require sacrifices that no performance is worth. The industry protocols established after Leo's suicide attempt, known informally as the Romeo safeguards, now require psychological support and regular mental health evaluations for actors working in romantic or emotionally intense roles, particularly when those actors are young or inexperienced. These protections exist because a 22-year-old actor once loved a fictional character so much that he nearly died trying to make that love real. And because a 17-year-old actress learned that the most dangerous performances are the ones where you forget you're performing at all. This is the heartbreaking true story of how Leonardo DiCaprio and Claire Danes' authentic love during Romeo plus Juliet filming led to psychological manipulation, genuine tragedy, and a suicide attempt that nearly cost Leo his life. Thank you for listening to this tragic tale of love, art, and the dangerous intersection between performance and reality. Don't forget to rate our story out of 10 in the comments and tell us which other Leonardo DiCaprio romantic tragedy you'd like us to explore next. Until next time, remember that the most powerful love stories are sometimes the most dangerous to live, and that some roles require sacrificing pieces of yourself that you may never recover.